that he was bleeding and his clothes were all ripped, and he ran up to his mother. And I told you the mother was a very challenged human being. The mother grabbed her son by the arm, beat him to a pulp, and said, "Nobody hurt you. Go up and get washed and never speak about this again." And every day of his life, he had to see that rapist down the street from him every day. I hate to put Fran on the spot because you've been around a long time with prisons. Just in the simplest terms, so everybody here knows the words. Say 3 sentences comfortable about the word PTSD.
Well, I'd say that I never met an offender. I never met an offender that wasn't a victim of crime first.
How about that for a statement? I never met an offender who wasn't a victim before. PTSD is no ask me. It isn't post-traumatic stress syndrome. It is present traumatic stress syndrome. Yeah. When it occurs in my therapy practice, I use this term. I'm not jumping up, I'm telling you. When you are a little child, and Dr. here can think about this, he'll probably say, I knew that already. When you're this big, this old, however the baby you think is, or this old, and you suffer not a trauma, even a pattern of traumas, you have, in my work, it's called an unbirthday. What is an unbirthday? It means you have no more birthdays the rest of your life. What about this one? Another unbirthday and another unbirthday, and the levels of trauma that is buried in human beings is enormous, many unbirthdays. And when something, a loud noise, or somebody says something that reminds you, or something that you wouldn't even think was harmful, and it ticks open the trigger for all your unbirthdays, it is unbearable. ¿Puedo avisarte tu edad, sí?
24.
Okay. Never ask a woman her age, but I did in Spanish. She's 24. So, if you were 48, or if you were an old guy like me, 74, am I old? I still play full court basketball. I roller skate every Wednesday night, and I'm the godfather of the biggest samba band in Philly. But the thing is, I have so many unbirthdays, and so many of our kids have so many unbirthdays, that when somebody pushes a button or a thing, a colleague of yours whom we both work with said to me about this talk, she said, Mr. V, let the people who show up know this, that those horrific, terrible reactions that we see in a criminal act are never one day old. They are an accumulation of all the unbirthdays that that young person, girl or boy, has suffered. And once you are broken into with all the unbirthdays, ladies and gentlemen, you have no choice but to react crazily to stop what was happening to you as a 2-year-old, an 8-year-old, or as a 25, 40-year-old. When Terry Williams, after he had completed the Philadelphia high school football championship quarterback, he was a track star, a B-plus student, had just fathered a beautiful little girl. He had a light projection outside, like a Donovan McNabb, before we ever heard of Donovan McNabb. Pro quarterback, millionaire, extremely handsome, gentle person. But nobody knew that from 13 years old to 18, that he was being raped by 3 adult older pedophiles, all of whom were passing him one to the other, and all 3 pedophiles were known to other people, and nobody turned them in. The man he was put onto death row for defending himself against was a deacon in an Episcopal church, highly respected, and the minister at the church knew that the guy was doing it for 20 years to hundreds of my students, hundreds.
Nothing strange.
And all over the place, the other 2 men, breaks my heart. I feel like a lot of tears when I tell this part. My school, 3 of them, but especially the Henry School, one of the most famous schools in Philadelphia, 3 Nobel Prize winners. C.W. Henry, yes, 3 Nobel Prize winners from that school. I would tell people I was the tour guide for the school. People came from all over the United States to move to Mount Airy to go to Henry School. From kindergarten to 8th grade, I told him it's a womb, a protection, emotional womb with the highest education, the best loved kids in the city. I'm a liar, I'm a liar, I'm a liar, but I didn't know I was a liar because for 23 years of my 33 years there was a pedophile amongst us.
And Terry went to Henry School?
Terry was the graduate of Henry.
He went to Henry School.
He was
Wow.
our number one. He was the most valuable player in all the sports we had.
Wow.
I taught him 2 years in 5th and 6th grade Latin, very bright. I coached him in basketball, the same team with Bernard Hopkins and many, many other kids. And there was a pedophile amongst us. A church organist, a look down your nose guy at everybody, dressed nicer than everybody, always like, I'm better than anybody, and you better know it, like that. And he lived 3/4 of a block from Terry in a high-rise apartment, and 2 afternoons a week he raped Terry for 5.5 years. And he never got caught. He died before it all came out. That's the tree, but those 3 pedophiles had forests. They did over 20 years of rapes of innocent children. The deacon, whom Terry finally stopped because he couldn't take it anymore, the deacon ran programs for teens. He ran dances at night. He was in charge of the altar boys, and he created a program like Mr. Sandusky for troubled children. Anybody remember the name of Sandusky's program for troubled kids?
Yeah, right.
What was it called? Second Mile. The second mile. I'll walk the second mile with you. And Sandusky will leave this element out just to mention it. Governor Corbett, everybody remember him? He was the Attorney General who was running the secret, you know this, and he was running the secret grand jury to investigate Sandusky, Paterno, all those people. And while he was running that as Attorney General, knowing he's going to go for governor, he uncovered enough evidence to put Sandusky away, but didn't even do it because he knew when he ran for governor, he needed a lot of millions of donors who were all Penn State alums. And he said nothing, nothing. And the front page of Newsweek magazine, which was still printed then, had a banner headline across the top of Newsweek front outside page, the secret culprit in the Penn State scandal. It was our governor. The idea of covering abuse and looking around, would you say abuse? I don't know how to spell that with you. Or the idea that in the 1980s, that's not long ago, therapists were still taught in universities where they were learning to be therapists, that when you're abused when you're real little, it's not that bad because you don't remember anything. When you're real tiny, it's not that bad. If you're real big, you might remember it. Can you imagine that they taught that to therapists? That's the way you deal with abuse of little children. That was until the 80s, early 80s. When Terry Williams was being abused by 3 different men, passing him 1 to the 1, many people say to me, Mr. Fay, he's a football quarterback. He's 6'1", and why didn't he? You know, I mean, if you're a football player, why don't you just rise up? Why don't you just rise up and beat the shit out of one of those bad abusers? Because when they get you, when you are little, the first time, it can be with a look. When they get you, you are powerless. They got you, and they got you for good. And you say, but run and tell somebody. You won't think anybody will believe you. And if you were raped when you were 4 years old and your mother doesn't believe you, why the hell should a cop or some principal in a school? So this incredible, handsome young kid had not yet committed any of the murders, and nor had he told anybody. And people are always saying, why don't you tell? It's not like that. If it were, a lot of abuse would be stopped, because it's important that the person talking to you about my son's case can be this honest with you. My own personal abuse was so horrific that when I was in high school studying to be a priest, If you had come up to me and offered me $10,000 and said, what was your childhood life? I could only say, we were poor. We were really poor. That's all I could say. All that horrific stuff was in 50 coal mines. I was 47 years old before part of my body reacted from the rape that my own brother and 3 big teens did to me. I had no knowledge of that. I could never talk about that. My body reacted for 6 months. When I was 58 years old, in my 50s, and I'm a famous therapist, I'm a major therapist. I speak to 8 million people on the Boston radio for years. And I talk to 8 million people for 3 hours about dreams and therapy. In my middle 50s, for 7 years, in the middle of the night, I would drive to Atlantic City and Ventnor, and I would scream at the top of my lungs for miles and miles in the middle of the night, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why. It was just horror. Driving to the shore at 58, I'm driving, talking to my older sister on the phone, and I mentioned the name of that brother who raped me, who had since committed suicide over his own rapes and mental health issues. And all of a sudden, part of the movie, the videotape came back, and I nearly flipped the car into a ditch over some of the memory of what my brother did. And I was 58. So how do you expect anybody or some of these anybody's to tell anybody when it might be so buried or so full of shame? At age 64, I'm very athletic. I'm big Mr. B. I got a big giant house full of Greek myths and statues, and I could lend you books. There's 1,487 books borrowed from my house right now, and you're welcome to borrow 10 apiece. And yet, when I was 64 in my own house, taking a shower, my shower is as big as a room, and I'm showering, no big deal. I had written a couple dreams, and all of a sudden, for 20 minutes, at the top of my lungs, I'm swinging my fists, and I'm yelling and swinging and screaming, "Get off me, Billy Reynolds, get off me, get off me." I had not said that name since I was 8 years old, when Billy Reynolds and 3 other boys, my brother, one of them, were raping me for hours and hours. Imagine, 64 years old, and it's that deep. So something you have to learn about the nature of abuse. It isn't just somebody robbed my wallet. In many different ways, people grow up with different struggles. During the teacher strikes in Philly, some of you might remember them, I was the leader of all those marches with the bullhorn and all that, and I was beaten up by the police badly in public, right in front of City Hall on rush hour. Beaten by a whole group of police on top of a car, right in front of the traffic. And as they're beating me up really bad, the guy with the most gold on his hat was hitting me the hardest. And I'm thinking like this, how am I going to stop this? And then when they stopped, Dan, who could I report that to? Who do I report it? I go to the police station at 11th Street and say, the cops were, you got me? And these kids, look at Terry's picture when he was first arrested. This is for a burglary he did. That's his little daughter, who's 3 months old, Tyra. And that's a picture of Terry Williams. And if you see the mother of his child, the brightest kid in the school, his next door neighbor, she was his best friend growing up, and finally had a child with her. They were going to have a great life, it seemed.
I'm confused. It says here he's your son.
Yes.
Biological son?
Okay, I'm going to ask somebody who might be able to answer that question. Can anybody explain what it means when it says, my son? Could somebody explain that? Ron?
Well, he legally adopted him.
Could you a little louder?
He legally adopted him when he was in prison, I believe.
Okay, anybody else who was here the whole day who knows how I call him my son since he's 9 and he has never known another father? Anybody else here?
He was born of your heart.
He's heart adopted.
When I was sitting next to you, I might not have spoken loudly enough, but I said, many people have challenged me and saying, show me the adoption papers. Stop saying he's your son, show me the adoption papers. And then sitting right next to you, but I might have spoken softly, Bob, I said, the adoption papers, if you could look, if you could look.
In his heart.
The adoption papers were signed right here. And then I said that I nurtured, cared, protected, unconditional love his whole life. That is what a father is. A piece of paper is good. You want to go to a court and get a paper, that's also good. But sitting next to you right here, I described that he's my son, and the papers are signed right here. Okay? So when Terry committed the crimes, this is what took place. 2 months before he killed Mr. Amos Norwood, who is the deacon from the church, another man who was in charge of, he was literally in charge of athletic men, driving them, and he had victims all over the city, and the man was raping my son in a bed, an older man, and my son defended himself right in the middle of the rape, and they gave him third-degree murder for that, which is the charge. If you defend yourself in the middle of someone harming you, to harm you or kill you, it's not, you're not allowed to kill anybody, but literally, he defended himself, and it was third degree. The maximum sentence is 20 years.
Yeah. I'm sorry, timekeepers, and you have about 8 minutes left.
Good.
because we have to-
That'll work perfectly.
Will that work
for what we
perfect?
have
Good.
left.
I just
Sure.
wanted to,
Thank you for bringing that.
Yeah.
During the course of the trial,
Yes.
did anyone point the finger at the man that
Was doing
your
it.
son killed?
Yeah.
Did anyone accuse him of
And
previous?
this is a very, very important thing in my son's trials, especially the second one where he got the death penalty. The amount of cover-up. My son's defense attorney, publicly appointed, talked to my son for 40 minutes the day before the trial. 40 minutes, barely took any notes, and then he's supposed to be defending him. And during the trial, they covered up everything that the other man had done, knowingly covered it up, and they did other tremendously illegal things.
I believe it.
So that, you see,
very common.
remember the gunslingers in the
Philadelphia.
cowboy movies? The gunslingers that get a notch on their gun for killing somebody?
Right.
So they got another, and the DA at the time, we'll just leave that in the air, the DA at the time, it was his first of 45 men put on death row. His first of 45, and I think all but 2 were black men.
Was that Judge Sabo?
No, but Judge
Was Sab-
Sabo, the judge, who was my neighbor, by the way, lives 6 houses from my house. Judge Sabo is he's dead, was the #1 hanging judge in the United States.
Yes.
In the United
Most
States.
judges in Texas.
And this judge prided himself on, I'm getting more death penalties than any judge in America. And he's the one that took my son's case. And during all the years of appeals, you can imagine 29 years of appeals, and those appeals were done so carefully by tremendous federal lawyers. They were beautifully presented appeals on different issues. And Dan, once you're in an appeal and they reject it, you can no longer appeal on that, right?
That's right.
Off the table.
Well, we find creative ways to do it, but
But
basically.
they mostly want to say, you said that before,
Right.
we can't hear it. So all those years of appeals, many good appeals. In 96, I went and banged on doors in the middle of the night, 1:30 in the night in a rainstorm. I said, what were you doing? I was banging on the doors of some of my students that I had found out were raped for 8 or 9 years by the same man. And they're like, Mr. V, what are you doing outside my house? It's raining, what are you doing? I said, listen, for some reasons, I know what happened to you. My house right now is full of federal lawyers and federal investigators. If you'll come in my car, I won't be in the room, I'll be outside in the rain. But whatever you can say, affidavits, could you tell us one sentence about what affidavits are that people file?
It's a statement saying this is, if I'm called to testify, this is what I'll testify to. I swear this is true.
Swear to tell the
Right,
truth,
yeah.
legal. So 2 of the men came to my house on different nights and spilled their guts for 4 hours. I was not allowed to be in the room, I had to be outside. And they told all the horrors that were done to them as little boys. And in 96, we took all those true things into court. And they laughed in my face. They laughed in my face. They said, oh, Mr. V, you can make kids say anything. You can make anybody lie about anything. We don't believe anything you're doing. And they laughed in my face. And when I walked across the courtroom to get sworn in, the judge made fun of me. He said, you're a therapist. You can't tell us anything. You have confidentiality. Why are we even bringing you in here? And I hadn't even sworn to tell the truth yet. Now you can imagine what such things do to justice in cases. I was going to bring to you a picture. I told you I might give you a copy of it. A prisoner on death row is an artist, and he did this. He made a picture, and it's this long, and it has lady, could you pretend for a minute that you're the queen? Now hold that, pretend that you're the Lady Justice. And there's the scales, hold the scales out like she's supposed to do, you know, the truth of justice in this. And he's got the blindfold on, Lady Justice, except the picture that the prisoner drew has the blindfold fallen down, and she can be prejudiced against one side or the other. In cases, if you watch too much TV of Perry Mason and Judge Judy, you don't really get the idea what goes on in courts. A career there, 30 years, me in courts advocating for people. The appeals for Terry ran out. You said, well, is he dead?
I mean, there's a
Close.
certain number of limitation of numbers?
5 years ago,
Yeah.
your appeals are over. We tried every appeal we could, and they were thrown out. Even though there was a lot of truth in every single year, we sent formal documents, you know what they're called, to the prosecutors saying, it's the law. Do you have any information that we need for our side of the case? And for 29 years, they responded the same way. We know of nothing that will be of value to your case. So, can we go in all those boxes of evidence without permission? We can't, they're sealed. So 5 days before Terry's, 5 years ago, 5 days before they were going to execute Terry, we finally found, by some great grace, a judge whose name we won't say here, but you can look it up. A judge who had just finished 3 years running the grand jury against the priest sex abuse scandal in this city. All of you know about that.
Yeah.
This archdiocese, one of the worst.
Yeah.
Hundreds of priests abused little children, boys and girls, for over 70 years, and none of them were ever prosecuted.
Philadelphia.
Philly Archdiocese, all over. None of them were ever prosecuted, nor the ones who kept transferring the priests so they could abuse more kids. So that judge, by God's grace, she got Terry's case at the last second, 5 days before execution. Unfortunately, when the prison was going to kill my son, 3 weeks before they would kill him, they said, you can't visit anymore. I said, what are you talking about? You're going to kill my son. Why can't I visit him? Because you're not a blood relative. There they go, right? You're not a blood relative. You have to. I said, I've been visiting my son for 30 years. They said, no, only blood relatives. There's no blood relatives to visit him. So they said, they called me at home a few days later and they said, we want to know your son's final wishes. What does he want for the funeral? And I felt like cursing them out. I said, how can I know his final wishes if you won't let me talk to him? So they went and had a conference with some people. They came back and said, we'll make an exception. Can you come up tomorrow? So I had to come up and ask my living son, what do you want for your funeral? What do you want the little write-up to say? What do you want to look like in the casket? And then I had to drive right home and go to the funeral director and sit there and talk to him about what my living son wanted in 6 days when they killed him. I had to do that as his father. And finally, moments like literally, you could take a breath and we would have been dead. The judge said, no. She said, we're going to stop this. And she ordered a stay of execution temporary and a new trial.
Was this the same judge that, the recent hearing?
Yes, that's right.
Right.
And
That
what
we attended.
happened was, it was stayed, but that means that I speak many languages, whatever. I study Bible. The word Seth in Spanish means thirst or hunger, thirst. And Seth Williams had a death lust for my son's life. The minute that the judge said, we've uncovered a lot of scandal that was in his early case, Seth Williams, in 6 minutes, ordered an appeal to still kill my son. When he was interviewed minutes later, why are you doing this? It's been exposed that you were doing corruption before. And he said, we have to protect the process, which meant if he's judged guilty of death, then we got to do it. And unfortunately, you can throw a lot of stones at anybody, and I wish Seth Williams wasn't in prison for the next 5 years or 100 years that he might have been. But I wish that he never did things that he shouldn't have done as a prosecutor. And now my son's case went to the United States Supreme Court on February 29th and 16. I was there, and the Supreme Court ruled strongly in favor of my son in one important element, which has reflected on tens of thousands of cases in America right now. So at this present time, my son, a few weeks ago, you were there, the judge ordered, I'm taking your son off of death row. The good offices of your place helped to get that done.
And that meant off of solitary confinement.
Off of death row, which literally means we can't kill you next week or tomorrow,
Right.
but you have to go on life without parole, and you can finally talk to other human beings, which is the case now. But we have to know that the case has a long way to go. There are many things that can happen with a lot of time and a lot of good lawyering. And that's the best way to put that.
You know, the struggle continues, and it will continue. I don't know if I showed you, that was the day we got him off death row. It was him in the ante room.
Look, everybody, that's Terry for the first time wearing normal clothes in 32 and a half years. And that's a person who could finally breathe in death row for 23 hours a day. In death row for 23 hours a day, you are not allowed to see the eyes of another human being. That's for your sentence. And the tax on your mental health being that, as a therapist and psychiatrist, if you could make a comment on what effect 23 hours a day of isolation would have on any human being, what are some possible effects on a human that's treated like that, if you would speak?
Well, I mean, I think it's very hard to predict the effects on any one person, but depression and anger would be the two dominant
Yes.
responses, I would think.
Absolutely. There's another, go ahead.
One effect could be poetry.
There you go. And you know what? Not only kind of work
It's running out.
friend there does, but
January
actual street.
25th,
Cherry Street is
2018, Amnesty International, Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia.
20 years of poetry telling
Susanna J.
and I am
Dobson.
now getting ready. I'm editing it now.
And we've been listening to Mr. V talking about the horrific story of the abuse and being on death row of his son, Terry Williams.
Let me point that question. I don't want to lose you. Go ahead.
I see some parallels with this case. There was a young man
Yes.
who